The Packers, who just beat the Seattle Seahawks, will face the 49ers. They'll be playing each other for the second time this season. The first time didn't go so well for Green Bay. Back in Week 12, San Fran beat them by 29 points, dominated from start to finish. But Niners head coach Kyle Shanahan says beating Green Bay in the regular season has, quote, zero relevance to the NFC Championship game. Chris Canny, is he right? Can you not compare the two?
Well, I think he's right in terms of the game looking different than it did back in Week 12. But the one takeaway that you can get from their regular season matchup was how your guys look against their guys.
Yep.
And I think that's the part.
Or most of their guys, because a lot of their guys were injured.
Well, Brian Bulaga didn't play the right tackle for the Green Bay Packers. In offensive line, that position group probably relies the most on continuity in terms of being able to collectively get their job done. And the strength of that 49ers team is their front seven. A lot of high draft picks, Nicky Bosa, Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner, D Ford, Solomon Thomas. They have a dominant defensive group. I think they were the only defensive line in football this year that had 4 rushers that had 6.5 sacks or more. So that is the strength of this 49ers team, and that's the part that Matt LaFleur has to be concerned with in looking at their first matchup. But the one thing that gave me a little bit of optimism for Green Bay going into this game is how they used Aaron Rodgers against the Seattle Seahawks. They got him out on the perimeter. They used a lot of swap boots to provide a target for him immediately in the flat off of the play fake. I think getting the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hand has to be a priority in this game, just because you can't afford to give those 49ers pass rushers an opportunity to get to them. So I think if Matt LaFleur and that offensive staff put together a similar game plan in terms of getting the ball out of their quarterback's hands, they'll have a chance to be successful.
I understand what Kyle Shanahan's saying. I totally disagree with him because of exactly what Canty alluded to. There are certain games where you just throw out what happened in the past. You just throw it out and you say, that's not going to duplicate itself.
Well, we just saw Tennessee. We were talking about the Tennessee and the
Absolutely.
Chiefs.
And there's where it's like, okay, there's a defensive score, there's a blocked field goal, there's a muffed handling on a field goal, there's a lot of weird things that happened. There are certain games where, especially if it's about pass rush versus offensive line, you big people versus big people, and you say, well, what is going to change? And I've kind of backed myself into a corner a bit on this because you guys know very well my commitment to take integrity and pick integrity, which is I picked the Packers to go to the Super Bowl before the year, and they're one of 4 teams remaining, so I'll be damned if I'm abandoning it. With that said, the day after that football game, 37-8 San Francisco, we sat right here, and I said, I think the Packers can still make the Super Bowl, but they're going to need someone to beat San Francisco for them, because it seemed like the San Francisco front 4, and that was a game without D Ford. You mentioned Bulaga didn't play, but neither did D Ford for San Francisco. That front 4 seemed so overwhelming compared to the Packers' offensive line that Green Bay couldn't get into anything they wanted to do. They were 1 of 15 on. It was the worst game they played all year. Fewest yards, fewest points. Worst they were on third downs all year. 1 for 15 on third downs. It was a terrible game. So I don't think San Francisco is going to be that dominant as they were in the game 2 months ago, because I don't think this game is going to be a blowout. But Green Bay better have been in the lab since then, figuring out, are we going to have to do something to reference Seattle? That Seattle does a lot. Bring in a 6th offensive lineman. Are we going to have to do a lot of misdirection, screens, something to get that pass rush off balance, off schedule? Because if that pass rush and front 4 has anything close to the effectiveness we saw in the regular season, Green Bay's drawing dead. I don't care how many times Jimmy Garoppolo throws it to the other team, he's going to throw it to Green Bay, and Green Bay's then going to go 3 and out. Because if you can't block these guys, and you mentioned how dominant the D-line's been statistically, and they're supposed to be. Yep. Nobody's put more resources into a defensive front than John Lynch in San Francisco since they've been there. This is how they've built that team. That will determine whether or not Green Bay can stay in this game. Can you give Aaron Rodgers more than 2 seconds to scan the field and figure out who the ball is going to?
And can you provide some easy completions for Aaron Rodgers as well? That was one of the things that I thought Matt LaFleur did well in that game against the Seahawks. I mean, in that gotta-have-it situation right before the 2-minute warning, during that throw to Jimmy Graham, if you look at the formation that they built, it was 3 by 1, and they had the number 3 receiver clear out because they had press man coverage, and then they brought Jimmy Graham on a crosser, and it created a natural pick with the safety who was in coverage on him, and that's an easy pitch and catch. It was actually the play that they used on the first down in the game, third down of the game on their first possession. So you look at those types of things. If Matt LaFleur can throw in enough of that, some high percentage throws for Aaron Rodgers, get the ball out of his hands, move the pocket, move the launch point a little bit, I think they'll have a chance. Because let's face it, the quarterback on the other side of this matchup hasn't been a world beater this year in Jimmy Garoppolo. And if the Minnesota Vikings could do anything with the interception that Aaron Kendricks got right before halftime, you're probably talking about a different game in the second half, a game that's a little more competitive out there in the Bay Area this past weekend. So I think it's all about Green Bay being able to try to do enough in terms of making some easy throws for Aaron Rodgers, but then also when you get in those situations, relying on Aaron Rodgers' greatness to take you over the top, because clearly they have an advantage with the quarterback matchup.
But Kenny, quickly, also maybe a little psychological coaching by Kyle Shanahan to make sure his guys forget what happened. This is not going to be an easy game.
That's 100% what he's doing.
Right?
He wants to make sure that the guys have the requisite urgency and intensity that they have to have going into an